Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Profit Power Hour, season number 3, presented by Profit Coach. So glad to have you joining us here today. This is, I'm just going to say it, a historic Profit Power Hour. We are talking about some really exciting things today, introducing the PM Operation Standards initial version. So we are super stoked to be diving into and doing a pretty big reveal on a lot of what we've been working on for the last 4 months over here with Profit Coach and friends. And speaking of friends, you guys are our friends today. So thank you for joining. We got some great panelists in the house as well. We really appreciate everybody tuning in live. And Peter, you made my heart skip a few beats. They were like, are you guys, Peter hasn't showed up yet. And I'm like, I'm only nervous when panelists don't show up till after I start. So I'm officially nervous, but we're good to go. And folks, tell us where you're tuning in from in chat. Make sure you have the option to chat everyone, not just the hosts and panelists. And what is the funnest thing you did this summer? All right. What is the funnest thing you did this summer? Kelly, I'm gonna start with you. What's the funnest thing you did this summer?
I just got back from Europe. So my funnest thing I did this summer was London, the Cotswolds, and Germany.
Awesome. No Olympics though.
No, gosh, no.
Yeah. Wolf, funnest thing you did this summer?
Fired an owner. I won't share the details, but it was fun.
All right, I'm just gonna say it. You have a very boring life. Peter, funnest thing you did this summer?
Funnest thing I did was a week on a dude ranch in Colorado with my oldest daughter and a bunch of my family and my sisters and their families. It's a blast.
Super fun. I went river tubing in Long Pine, Nebraska with my kids and nieces and nephews. Super fun. All right. Thanks, folks. Opened up a new market. Love that. Way to go, Trey. Awesome. Also fired an owner. A few people are having that fun party this summer. Sam, 43-day drive across country with my 6 kids. We saw 22 national parks. All right, Sam, I think that one takes the cake. That's pretty awesome. All right, folks, thanks for being with us here today. And like I said, some fantastic panelists in the house. Kelli Segretto with K Segretto Consulting. Check her out. She's fantastic. We have clients that work with her and love her. Wolfgang Croskey, owner at Croskey Real Estate, also a fantastic operator. And Peter Lohmann, broker, CEO, RL Property Management, and host and writer of a phenomenal newsletter over at peterlohmann.com. Did I get the URL right?
You did. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, and me, author of the NARPM Accounting Standards and lead author of the forthcoming PM Operations Standards. I need to add that to my credential list here. CSO over at Profit Coach. We help PMs expand their entrepreneurial freedom by building highly profitable, self-managing companies. All right, tons to cover today. We're going to jump in. Want to make this interactive. We are going to talk about the things that PMs feel passionate about, love to debate about, and create controversy around. So if there's not a significant amount of banter and dialogue in the chat box, I'm going to be highly offended. And it can certainly include, we 100% disagree with you, Daniel. All of that is fair game. We just want to hear your opinions. But if you have specific questions that you want to make sure we cover, put those in the chat box, or in the Q&A box rather, so that we can be sure and cover those today. All right, we are introducing the PM Operations Standards. And as always, when we release this kind of information and this kind of framework to the industry, our goal is to help us shift our thinking about what's possible, to move from operational fog to operational clarity, from gut-based decision-making to data-driven performance management, both for your team and for your clients, and ultimately from mediocrity to benchmark success. That's what we're about today. So are you guys ready? Can I get a little energy in the house? Okay, we are going to tackle, we're going to talk a little bit about the problem that we're tackling here with the PM Operations Standards. We touched on this before, so I'm going to go through it really quickly. And guys, maybe just a little bit of feedback from the panel right now. Why, from your perspective, do we need the PM Operations Standards? What problem is this kind of standardization of industry performance going to solve? Kelli, ladies first.
Gosh, there's a couple of things. I think first off, it strips out the emotion. I think a lot of times we make decisions because we feel like we're off, or we think we're off, or we think we're in line with the other companies in our area. And so this gives more clarity in our decision making and more structure. I think the other component for me is really allowing our technology companies to get on board with us, because a lot of times our tech companies that we're working with are struggling to be able to have a one size fits all in the way that they're approaching their software solutions. And so instead of trying to cater to a small group, they end up not having any of these functions or features that we need, or having such a boutique amount that it's not really servicing the industry. By standardizing some of our metrics, some of our operations, we're able to then be more inclusive with our technology companies and get a lot more from them.
Good feedback. Thoughts, Wolf and Peter? What problem do the operation standards solve?
Yeah, I love everything about that. I also had down just something as basic as standardizing our terms and our definitions for things like lease renewal rate or days on market. I mean, this like the value of that is high. And I know not everyone's going to agree on the definitions that we landed on, but at least we have something to work off of now. That's going to be huge. I'm also big on getting the benchmarking data. So understanding where my company is performing on things like leasing performance, turnover performance, lease renewal rate, that's going to allow me to understand where to focus on in my business, like what's wrong, and then I can fix it. If I don't even know what's wrong, I'm just sort of making a guess as to why my owners or my residents are unhappy. I'm also excited about aligning incentives and like, in other words, inside your company, setting up incentive structures that are aligned with milestones that matter to property owners. And the fact that we're finally going to be able to measure these KPIs that are tied to milestones that matter for property owners, where they get value, then we can set up various things to align the incentives within our company to hit those things and make them better. So that's huge. And then just to reiterate what Kelli said about like our tech partners, once we have these standards in place, the partners will be able to build products and dashboards around what we've defined. And that is going to be massive. It's going to allow for better integration. It's going to allow for faster time to value for new customers of any given tech product or platform. And just, again, that standard terminology, everyone's going to know what everyone else is talking about.
I think for me, I feel like the dumb kid in the AP class. So I keep it simple. It's going to cut through the crap, because right now, when you say, hey, are you a good operator? You could look at like Yelp reviews, like, oh, well, they got 81. Well, we all know how to game that system. Okay, well, what's your revenue per unit, right? And so we haven't really had a way to determine, are we a good property management company? Like, what does good mean? What does that look like? And it's also going to really divide the herd, those that get on board versus those that don't. Because like, I know for Peter and I, we both have a scorecard on our website that has our stats that potential clients can look at, and I've closed some deals based off of that. But at the end of the day, a potential owner's like, okay, it's 5 days or whatever it may be for the different stats. They have nothing to compare that to. And so this is going to help the consumer actually look for who is a good property management company, who can take care of this asset, who's going to help me. And it's going to separate things. So I think really when it comes down to it, we'll really be able to define what is a quote unquote good property management company, and more importantly, help inform the consumer what they should look at. And it's just going to level up our industry, I think, more so than the NARPM accounting standards.
Took the words right out of my mouth. We are in the business of answering the question, how do you know if you're doing a good job? Most people answer this question based off their Google reviews. Like you said, Wolf.
That's how we used to do it, because it was like I had nothing to compare to.
Exactly. But what if you could measure client experience at the level of your process performance? What if you could then use that data to outperform your competition and prove it to your clients, exactly like Wolf and Peter were talking about, except that you had data on your scorecards and your website that said, here's where our market is, and here's where we are in relationship to that market. And then what if you could measure the efficiency of your core processes compared to your peers, and then manage your team performance, measure the output of each team member so that you can coach them into top performers. That's the vision. That's the goal. Those are the goals behind the PM operations standards. So I want to talk a little bit about just one last point before we dive into what the standards are, how we got here, and we've got some exciting things queued up for the rest of this webinar. I'll get to that in just a second. But really what we're doing with the PM operations standards is moving up the chain of insight, moving up the hierarchy of insight. In answering this question of how do you know if you're doing a good job, like the basic entrepreneur just logs into chase.com. They're like, there's money in the bank account today. We must be doing okay, right? Not a super high level of sophistication. I get that. It's good you have money in the bank account, but we want to then understand, well, what's driving that bank balance? And that's where we have the financial metrics produced in the NARPM accounting standards. But then the next step up from there is the operational metrics that we're talking about today. And then the last step, which is really what Profit Coach has been working on over the last year with what we call SIGI metrics, is the real-time metrics that answer the question of what do I need to do today to win? In other words, SIGI metrics stands for can I go home yet? And the idea is that if you do everything you need to do today to win, the glass balls that you cannot drop on a daily basis, then everything else is going to fall in line from there. Your operational metrics, your financial metrics, and ultimately your bank balance. All right, so that's high level context. Let's dig in to the newly defined PM operations standards. We've been working on this. All of you guys on the call today are part of our PM operations standards council, which is a council of about 9 members. And these are leading PMs and consultants in the industry. And we've had multiple rounds of discussion that kicked off really at Broker Owner earlier this year, where we defined what are the major milestones in core property management processes. And once we got to a level of agreement on the common milestones that are common to the various ways that property management can be done across the country and across the industry, once we know what those standard milestones are, we now have a framework for defining standard metrics. So we'll show you the milestones and the metrics today. But the last couple of months, we've been working with our council in some lively conversations. Guys, that was the best word I could use to describe our conversation from a few weeks ago. Some lively conversations with really solid discussion and back and forth and banter around what the common milestones are, what those should be in the standards, and the metrics that flow from those. But I would say, guys, with the number of strong opinions in the room, would you guys agree? We were able to get to a really significant amount of consensus at the end of the day. That gives me a lot of confidence for the framework that we're rolling out here. Thoughts and observations on the conversations we've had so far?
For me, what was interesting is that there weren't large philosophical differences. It was mostly in small, minute details. I don't think when people really sit back and look at what's being covered, I think we're going to get agreement pretty quickly, because it's just most of our things. Yeah, well, I dot my I this way, you dot it that way, and that's where our discussions were about. But philosophically, on the big chunks, we were all like, "Yep, sounds good. Next."
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was healthy discussion and debate in a way that I like. It produces a better end result if you have differing opinions and you sort of allow a little space to healthily tease those out. Yeah. Without spending an hour, getting lost in the weeds on something that really, in the long run, doesn't matter all that much. So, yeah. Good job moderating that, by the way, Daniel. That's not easy to determine. Should we let this discussion continue, or are we sort of reached a natural conclusion and let's move on?
Yeah. All right, Kelli, did you have something there?
it's just a lot of really strong opinions that were all being respectfully shared, so that we could cut through the minutia of defining each of these terms. I think a lot of us have similar terminology. It's the definitions that we were getting caught up on of, what is the starting point? What is the stopping point? What is the true measurable here? What are we really looking at? And fantastic group of people to be able to collaborate with.
Yeah. And I really do think the key to being able to get to that level of consensus was working from the milestone perspective, right? We have to understand what the framework and structure of the processes are, and that gives us a common language from which we can then have meaningful definitions. All right, let's stop talking about what we did and let's actually show what we did. And what we're going to do is walk through the core process milestones as well as the key metrics that have sort of emanated to the surface in relationship to those core processes. That's going to be about the next 30 minutes. And then what we're going to do is walk through a 9-question survey with everybody on the call. We've got 120 people on the call here, all right? That's, in this industry, that's actually a really decent sample size. And we're going to ask everybody on the call to tell us what your target is for 9 core metrics, all right? And then we're going to review the results at the end of the call. We'll look at the median, the average, the minimum, the maximum. We're going to see all of this data in the next 45 minutes, all right? I'm pretty jazzed about this, guys. Like, I feel like we're in the middle of making history. So let's get some good engagement and participation. Pay attention to what we're going to talk about, because you're going to have to understand what we're talking about in order to be able to finish and complete the survey and contribute to some really awesome data as part of this webinar. All right, so I'm actually going to skip this slide. It's a really sweet slide. It talks about what we're doing at Profit Coach, but we're going to dive into the next thing here, which is the unit onboarding process. All right, you guys can basically see on each of these what we call milestone maps, the key milestones that we believe represent some of the most significant either start points, stop points, or in some cases, bottlenecks or value creation moments in the process. Those are kind of the 4 things that we're looking at: start, stop, bottleneck, or key value creation milestone. And so through a lot of discussion, we've looked at what are those key milestones for the unit onboarding process. And you guys can, throughout the slide deck, kind of just ignore these day markers. Those are really placeholders. But the key milestones in the process are what you want to pay attention to. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this one because, frankly, unit onboarding metrics are not like as exciting as some other things that we're going to talk about. But the key thing to note here is this one right here. Management start date. We had a lot of debate about this, all right? And basically what we concluded was that we need to distinguish between the day that the PMA is signed and the day that the company begins their management services, whether that's a turn process or a leasing process on a particular unit. For some owners, those are the same days. For some property management companies, those are the same thing. For some management companies, not the same thing. So we made a distinction here. Management start date is a really key milestone in measuring a lot of different metrics. Any comments you guys want to make on the unit onboarding process, things that are important to you before we move on?
Go ahead, Peter.
I like where we landed here. I think it's a good balance between having things that are important, but without too many steps captured on the process. And yeah, like we often sign a PMA with a start date that could be up to 30 days out. And so having the management start date be the start for a lot of KPIs like speed to revenue for the owner and things like that is important.
Awesome. Okay.
I was just going to add, because there may be people watching this, unit onboarding is that we kind of established, and a lot of people are already doing this, but, unit/property onboarding and owner onboarding being separate processes that run simultaneously, for those that are wondering, like, well, when do I do my owner's W-9 and all that stuff? So
yeah, good point.
W-9's at the end of the PMA.
So
it is for us too, but
sorry.
One of the lively discussions that we had was what is the difference between a make ready / turnover, and we're defining a make ready as basically the rent ready process for a new and unleased unit, versus a turnover is essentially what happens between two occupancies. So basically the same thing, but different spots in the process. So we named them different things. And then defining the difference between those, like a standard turn and a remodel. And so this was a definition that we came up with, which ultimately we kind of vetoed in the last council meeting, Kelli, in favor of a revenue threshold, to give something that's really concrete as a methodology for distinguishing, sorry, not a revenue threshold, a cost threshold, a certain number of thousands of dollars to distinguish between a standard turn and a remodel. All right, so we need a little audience participation here. And the question is, at what dollar amount, in your opinion, at what dollar amount does a turnover or make ready become a remodel? Again, we're looking for some kind of line to turn a gray continuum. We all agree it's a gray continuum, but we need to define something of a bright line, because the time it takes to do a standard turn is going to be different than the amount of time it takes to do a remodel. So put your dollar figure in chat. At what dollar figure does a standard turn into a remodel? Of course, it depends on the market. Absolutely, Jan. You are absolutely right. And by the way, a lot of you are chatting hosts and panelists. So switch that to everyone. Okay, this is actually really affirming. The number that we came up with for the council as a potential national average is $10,000. And that's very close to what we're seeing here. The range is basically 5 to 15K, with 10 right in the middle. Kelli, you weren't part of this discussion. Thoughts?
Oh, I've worked with different companies across the United States, and I think 10 is a fair number. I think it's going to be high for some. I think it's going to be low for some. So I think if we're looking at this as a benchmark standard, so I think 10 is fair. But if I were in Wolfgang's market in California, there's no way 10 grand is going to be where I'm going to make that line in the sand. So it's going to have to be a little bit adjustable for each particular market. That's where regional metrics come into play, but I definitely think 10 is probably the right place to land for this.
Awesome. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about the make ready process. Essentially the same as the turnover process, with a couple of different starting points. So for the make ready process, kicks off with the initial assessment. And if you look back to the onboarding milestone map that we saw just a few minutes ago, there was an initial assessment milestone, and that really is also the starting point for the make ready. And so what you can see here is, the start with initial assessment, scope defined, send estimate to owner, so on and so forth, work completed, final assessment approved. There was some debate about this. And one thing I forgot to tell you guys is a lot of you probably contributed to the survey we sent out 2 weeks ago, getting feedback on a lot of these metrics. So in addition to the council, we got feedback from 113 property managers in a really detailed sort of colonoscopy level survey about property management metrics. And we've taken all that feedback and boiled that down into what we're looking at today. Some people disagreed with the idea that a make ready is finished at the final assessment. Some people said, no, that's really when the work is completed. But we kind of are sticking to our guns on this one. There needs to be a final assessment as best practice to indicate that the work has been completed. All right. So where does that put us in terms of a metric? Where that puts us in terms of the key metric on make readies is obviously make ready speed, days from management start date, which is a unit onboarding milestone, to final assessment approved. And so basically what we're saying is that if we're going to measure the performance of the maintenance team, we're really looking at the first day the maintenance team can begin work, which is, in our opinion, the management start date, all the way up to the time when the final assessment on the make ready is approved. Comments, feedback on this one from the gallery?
I agree.
Very good.
I think this is why we got into such a debate over that management start date versus the PMA is signed, because there's so many situations where an owner is still occupying the property, or they want to do their own turnover, or, you know, they want to start services, but their contract doesn't end with their current management company for another month or two. And so I think starting from that management start date, this is where we kind of started really diving into defining that that's a different date.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really critical. Where again, the definition of management start date is the date which you can start work. So to your point, Mark, in chat, if by management start date you mean something other than the day in which you can start work, then we're talking about two different terms. This is the day where the management company can start work. Peter?
Yeah, there's like 3 dates that are relevant here. The day you sign the PMA, the day the PMA starts, and then I think what you're saying, Daniel, and what we agreed on is that management start date, as we're using it here today, means the day that you have everything you need to start managing the property. That would be keys, that would be onboarding funds, anything along those lines, to where you could actually go to the property and do something. So it may be worth tweaking that phrasing a little bit, management start date, just so it's not confused with like the start date of your contract.
Yeah, good feedback. All right. So the idea here is this is the metric both to measure the overall speed of with which you're getting the property rent ready, as a way in relationship to how that presents value to the owner, but also in terms of measuring the performance of the maintenance team. Turnover process, very similar. This is again after a vacancy, after a move out for a property you're already managing. Very similar milestones, and turnover speed is measured slightly differently. It's days from transfer of possession, which is a move out milestone, to the final assessment approval of the turnover. So here, the start point is the transfer of possession. We believe that's the time where the maintenance company or the maintenance division has the freedom to begin the process of the turn. And obviously that would start with perhaps a move out inspection. And some people are like, well, why don't you start the clock at the move out inspection? And the reason we're not doing that is because we believe it's up to the maintenance team to get out and do the move out inspection ASAP after the transfer of possession. So we're defining these milestones in such a way that it really forces ownership of the end-to-end process by the various departments. Any comments on this one?
So of course there's going to be owners who delay their own turns. It's like shooting themselves in the foot because they're not approving the scope or they're not sending the money. There's an argument to be made about, well, should we penalize the management company's metric for something that's outside of their control? I get that. At the same time, we are here to help our owners, and the way we help them is getting their units turned over faster. We need to help them help themselves, and we need to apply pressure to them to approve turns and send the money. So I think it's good to put this pressure on ourselves internally, which then in turn directs the pressure onto our clients to keep everything moving, because nothing derails an owner's portfolio faster than vacancies that start to cascade and stack up.
Yeah. Awesome. One of the questions came in from Anna. Define final assessment. This is what is customarily referred to as a final turn inspection in standard PM parlance. But due to Kelly's very aware legal brain, we decided not to use the word inspection, since that is a legally defined term in some states. So what we're talking about, Anna, is the final inspection of the turnover, but we're calling it a final assessment. All right, let's move on to some turnover supporting metrics. And these are really common to both the turnover process and the make-ready process. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but these are incremental steps within the turn process that we believe are going to be important to measure if you want to sort of diagnose your overall turnover speed, right? So if your turnover speed isn't where you want it to be, what are some key metrics that would measure key bottlenecks in that process? Number one, speed to dispatch. This is days from the transfer of possession to vendors dispatched. How quickly are you dispatching a vendor? All right. Secondly, speed of turnover work. This is the time, this is how quickly are the vendors actually getting the work completed. This is days from vendors dispatch to final assessment approved. So really, these two metrics basically divide turnover speed in half. And so this gives us a way of breaking down where the bottleneck may be in your turnover process. One of the common bottlenecks inside of the turnover process is the owner approval and funding. Now, some of you guys are like, wait a minute, we already have all that negotiated in our PMA. More power to you. I'm sure this goes very fast, like 0 days. Not everybody does that. And so this is for those that do get approval and funding inside the turnover process. This is days from estimate sent to owner approval and funds received. All right. Any comments on, one more, turnover callback rate. This is the number, basically, essentially, the percent of times that you have to call a vendor back after the final assessment. So you go out, vendor does their work, you do a final assessment, you find more stuff. What percent of time are you calling vendors back in your turnover process? Comments on this one before we move on?
All these metrics also just allow you to know what levers you can pull, and when you pull levers, be able to see what progress happens. So if you're having trouble with your speed to turnover work, you're putting process in place that's going to improve that number, and you can see whether those process improvements or changes that you made are being followed by all and then turning into true change to your numbers. Without these little kind of smaller milestones within the milestone, you don't have as many opportunities to pull those levers and know where the change is going to come from and where those little tweaks need to be made to your processes. So these are very, very instrumental in the overall progress and your ability to enact change in your business.
Great feedback. Awesome. Well said. Trey, I love the live commentary you're bringing to this webinar. Thank you. Let's move on and talk about marketing. Property marketing process. And this is distinct from the applications process. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap between these two. But one of the things you'll observe is some interesting milestones in this process that you may not have, like, I don't even know what that means. And one of those, probably the most important one, is this ready to execute lease. All right, so here's what's going on. One of the by far the biggest debate around property management is what is the technical definition of days on market and overall leasing speeds, because of all of the different ways that people handle pre-listing and pre-leasing and pre-listing without pre-leasing and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when it comes to calculating specifically days on market, we had to define what does on market mean. And is a coming soon listing of a property actually on the market? Our definition says no, that on market is when you're actually ready to show or execute a lease on that particular property. And so for a lot of people, when they list a property, they're also simultaneously ready to show and execute a lease on that property, which means these two milestones for you are one and the same. If you're pre-listing, that is not the case. And the days on market starts at the time when you are ready to execute a lease in order to exclude the pre-listing time, which is not really, means the property is really not leasable. So that's one important metric or milestone around the marketing process. And yes, Mark, or yes, Donald, days vacant is more relevant. We're going to get to that in just a moment. So those are the key milestones for the leasing process. One of the things that is also baked in here is the understanding that the end of the marketing process is when a deposit is received as well. And certain people were like, well, we don't necessarily get the deposit in the leasing process. And all of our PM gurus were quick to jump on that and say, no, best practice is you collect the deposit at the time of lease execution. Any comments on this one before we move to metrics, guys? All right, let's move on. Let's talk metrics. All right, so when it comes to marketing metrics, and really perhaps the most defining value metric for owners, we came up with a metric. This is a new metric, a new concept in the way that it's defined specifically, called days without revenue. Probably the closest thing to it is days vacant, but really owners don't care about days vacant. What owners care about is days without revenue. Now, there's two very distinct time periods in which a unit may be vacant, and that is in the initial onboarding of a new and unleased unit. So we have a metric variant for that. That's days without revenue for new and unleased units. And days without revenue starts from the days from the management start date to the lease start date. All right, revenue starts at the lease start date. So days without revenue is from the management start date to the lease start date. Now, for units that you've already been managing and that had a tenant or a resident in them that moved out, the definition is slightly different. This is days without revenue for a leased unit, and this is days from lease end date to lease start date. The basic same concept, except the starting point is slightly different. It's days from lease end date to lease start date, days without revenue. Which, notice we're not using move-in or move-out dates. These are the lease end dates, lease start dates, which tie to the actual rent charges. So then the combined metric, some people are like, well, we don't measure those differently. That's all the same for us. Then you would use the total combined metric, which is days without revenue for all lease steps. And that's a combination of the two definitions that we just discussed. Guys, I think this is probably the most important metric for owners. Would you agree? Any comments, thoughts on this?
No, that's, it's when an owner signs a management agreement, to them, that's when the clock starts ticking usually. Like, okay, when am I going to start getting cash flow? And then when they find out a tenant gave notice or that it's vacant, if they skipped, through the night, whatever, to them, that's when they start counting the clock of, okay, when am I going to get my next distribution? And so, although there's a lot of moving parts in there that they don't see, because as a good management company, you're the buffer and you prevent them seeing the headaches and feeling those pain points, their reality is your reality. So yeah, it may seem unfair. It may seem all these things. I think a lot of seeing the comments here, a lot of these terms and definitions are offensive. It's kind of a combination of offended and you're being sensitive, but your client's reality is your reality. If you don't like that, find a different business. And so you have to do your best to control that and make things work. And sometimes that requires a magic wand with fairy dust, but that is the reality. When their cash flow stops, they start counting until they get their next distribution. And that by far is their biggest pain point. And it doesn't matter how sweet that lady was that signed the PMA. When her cash flow stops, she will flip on you until she gets her check again, and then she'll be a nice, sweet lady again. So
that's right.
Or guy, doesn't always have to be a lady, but I think you get the point.
Yeah, and not for nothing, but for many property managers, this is tied to your revenue as well.
Yep.
Obviously it's very explicit if your management fee is a percentage of rent collected, but even if it isn't, like in our case, we have a flat rate charge and we charge it occupied or vacant, same rate. But a lot of our other revenue is tied up in occupancy, things like resident benefits packages and other ancillary fees and revenue streams, all actually tied to occupancy. Also, a vacant unit is a big, big liability for you and your company. Break-ins, frozen pipes, all kinds of mayhem and nonsense can happen out of a vacant unit. And so it's a very important metric, not only for our clients, but also for us.
And to your point, George says vacancy days is days without revenue, except that's not what vacancy days means. Vacancy days means how many days is the tenant not in the unit. That's what vacant is. And so I agree with that. In many cases, people may have a conception of days vacant that is equal to days without revenue. It's just that it's not very precise, and this will help us make sure we're all meaning the same thing when we talk about this. All right, some supporting metrics for marketing. We're gonna have to move through this a little bit more quickly, but really excited about some of these. Speed to listing. This is a metric that's going to have variance in the operation standards based on whether or not you do pre-listing or not. But for those who don't, the standard metric is going to be days from final assessment approved to the property listed. Now, I realize some people are already listing properties during the unit turn. And so in that case, there's going to be a variant metric that applies to you, but this is kind of standard. Days on market is days from ready to execute lease, what we already discussed, to lease executed and deposit received. And then this is a new metric that we think is going to be really, really valuable for measuring the overall performance of your leasing team. This is rent ready to revenue speed. In other words, how long does it take for your leasing department to go from final assessment approved on the maintenance turnover to the lease start date, which equals revenue? We think that this is a really powerful metric for sort of isolating in the context of days without revenue. You really have the turnover piece of it, which is transfer possession to final assessment approved, and then the leasing portion, which is final assessment approved to lease start date. Not lease executed, not the end of days on market, but really the lease start date, which is, again, where the money is. So rent ready to revenue speed, we think, is a really new and profound leasing metric to manage the performance of leasing teams. Kelli, quick thoughts on this, since this is new as of the last council meeting?
Yeah, I think one of the important things that we often overlook is when our leasing team is giving flex days of, we leased it today, but we're not going to have their move-in happen for 2 weeks,
Right,
or 10 days or 5 days, whatever your standard is. But this allows you to see how that's then impacting the bottom line of
yes.
your owners' portfolios and your portfolio, so that you can make tweaks to those standards that you're setting for your internal operations as well.
100%. That's spot on. Vacancy rate, percent of total units with an active PMA not undergoing remodel that are vacant. All right. Does that make sense? So of all the units in your portfolio that have an active PMA and are not undergoing a remodel, what percent are vacant? Okay, moving on. Applications. We're going to move through this a little bit more quickly, but you can see here, application submitted, all documents collected, applicant qualified, applicant selected. Some of you are like, well, what's the difference? For those of you who do first approval equals first selection, those two milestones are the same thing, but not everybody does it that way. Some people approve a cohort of applications and then select one from that pool. And so we had to distinguish those two milestones to account for that process differentiation, all the way up through lease sent and lease executed, deposit received. All right, so what are some of the key measurements here? Probably one of the most important application process metrics is speed to application qualification. And this is days from all documents collected to applicant qualified. Some supporting metrics here on applications is also kind of the next milestone, how fast from the time that documents are collected to the time when you actually select an applicant. Speed to lease sent, which is how long from when the applicant has been selected to when the lease has been sent. Some people do that really fast, but some people may take 24, 48 hours. Vendors are working on solving this challenge right now, such that it's very immediate. Lease speed to lease executed, again, how much time from the time in which the applicant was selected to when a lease was executed and deposit received. So really breaking the application cycle down into these key pieces that can then be measured and benchmarked. Also interesting for predicting application volume required is applications per lease executed and then application qualification rate. And if you have those two numbers, you can basically say, all right, here's the kind of application flow we believe we will need to take all of our properties that are currently on market and lease them. Okay, I'm going to move on unless you guys have any burning comments that you just can't hold on to. All right, moving on, move-in process. I'm going to move through this really quickly. There's some debate around when the tenant move-in evaluation happens. For some, it happens ahead of the move-in. For some, it happens at the end of the move-in. We went ahead and placed it after the move-in. because there's going to be a metric related to this I'm not going to talk about today, which is how long after lease start date do you typically, is it before you typically get your move-in evaluations from the tenant? All right, lease renewal process. Spent a lot of time talking about this one. And one of the major contributions that Todd Orchide made to this entire process is telling us all of the milestones that should not be in these milestone maps, which we decided to keep anyways, and just tell you that Todd thinks they shouldn't be in here. And that's pretty much any time you ask for owner approval. All right, so we're going to name this milestone the Todd X milestone. Anyways, all right. So this is lease renewal process starts in reverse with the PM's decision to renew, market rate determined, owner approval of the market rate, renewal presented, offer presented to the tenant, renewal decision by the resident, and then either the lease is extended in the form of a long-term agreement or month-to-month or notice to vacate. All right. By the way, guys, I made that change from agreement extended to lease extended from our meeting on Monday. So in terms of renewal rates, couple of ways this can be measured, and we're going to give both options in the operation standards. A renewal rate without month-to-month. Most PMs, when they think about renewal rate, they really want to know what % of our tenants go on a long-term renewal, because that's what they're trying to drive for. At least a lot of PMs are trying to drive for long-term renewals as opposed to month-to-month. And so renewal rate is the % of lease extended or notice to vacate where the decision is an extended renewal agreement. And then with month-to-month is simply the same thing, but adding the month-to-month option. But we had some interesting discussion that because of legal considerations around requiring a renewal, we think that a metric that's going to be up and coming and perhaps more significant to the discussion in days ahead is resident churn rate. And this is the % of residents active at the beginning of the period who left during the period, very similar to how we calculate unit churn. And we're going to get some data on this in just a few minutes on what we think this number actually might be. Moving on, market determination, market rate determination, lead time. How far ahead of the lease end date are you actually determining the market rate? And then how far ahead of the lease end date are you getting the renewal decision, or rather the agreement extended? We think these are important metrics for, again, measuring the effectiveness of your renewal team. Move out process. Maybe a key metric here is the speed to move out inspection. For a lot of people, this automatically happens within 24 to 48 hours. Still worth benchmarking. Some other move out supporting metrics would be speed to final accounting and speed to security deposit disposition completion. All right. And the last big process that we want to talk about today is the work order process for non-turn work orders. And this one got bloated because there was a lot of opinions on this, but we really do think that what we have here on the screen is important. And so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but without a doubt, the key metric here related to the work orders is speed to repair, which is days from work order submitted to work completed. Some supporting metrics for work orders would be triage rate. This is a % of work orders resolved without a vendor or technician being sent. I don't think many people measure this, but I think this is really going to be interesting, at least to benchmark and track internally of what %, and you can begin to think about measuring this, guys, based off of per maintenance coordinator. I love the thought of being able to compare the performance of individual maintenance coordinators based off of their individual triage rates. And that I think is going to be really interesting because obviously the more you can triage, the better. Speed to validation, days from work order submitted to work order validated, speed to owner approval and funding above the reserve amount, speed to schedule, speed and work order callback rate. All right, moving through these pretty quickly, but hopefully you can kind of see where we're headed with those in terms of breaking out various aspects of the work order process. Okay. And then some communication metrics that are going to be part of PM operations standards. First, response time and average response time are two key communication metrics But research shows that first response time in terms of the speed and business hours from first communication to communication acknowledged is actually more defining of customer experience than your overall average response time. Guys, there's a lot going on here in chat. What's an inspection cross between an assessment and inspection? I love it. Talk about monumental. We're creating new words today. Okay. All right. Moving on. I didn't know this content was going to be, but okay.
Like, why aren't my panelists talking? I'm like, oh, we are. We're lighting up the chat with fire.
Okay. All right. Communication supporting metrics, number of touches to resolution, first month resident inbound contacts. This is the Wolf metric. Wolf, I got this one from you. This is the number of inbound resident calls and emails in the first 30 days. First month owner inbound contacts, inbound owner calls, emails in the first 30 days, as a measurement of how proactive are you being in your communication. This is really what this measures. And then inbound calls, emails per unit, per month, across a given time period, across the entire portfolio. Really valuable way of just measuring like, wow, guys, we have so many customer service tickets. Well, maybe there's other PMs that have half as many because they're just doing a better job of providing information proactively. This is going to be a really interesting measurement of that. All right, so what's the target? This is the time of the day where we are excited to have you actually jump in and create the first ever PM Operations Standards initial targets. I just popped these numbers, the survey into chat. And what I want everybody to do is to pull open that survey and go ahead and pull that up on your screen. And we're going to walk through this in tandem with you. And essentially what we've got here is a survey on 9 different metrics. And we're going to walk through these one at a time. And I'm going to get the panelists to agree on what the target should be. We're going to fill this out with you. So everybody, this is really critical. If we do not get you into this survey via the link in chat, your data won't be contributed, and that will be a huge disappointment for all of us. So click it and get it and help us create these numbers right now. Okay, and if you haven't gotten it yet, I'm going to put it in chat again. So unless otherwise indicated, we are talking about calendar days in every case, not business days. Okay, we did have that discussion. We are talking about calendar days across the board, not business days. All right, here we go. What is your target turnover speed? And just to simplify this, I'm gonna let Kelly answer these for the panel. Kelly, what's
simplify?
the target?
You should have had a drop down menu. What's with all these bubbles here? Like, this is multiple scrolls.
This is how I have to get real-time analytics. All right, well, if you can, yeah. All right, Kelly.
For a turnover speed for a standard turn, I want 5 days.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, guys.
Let's not get crazy.
This is from transfer of possession, right? I just want to differentiate.
Transfer of possession to final assessment approved in 5 calendar days.
Okay, I'll
Kelly
say
wants.
7. I'll say 7.
Okay. All right.
Kelly's team all runs on Red Bull, apparently.
Yeah. Okay. Kelly, what is your target days without revenue on a new and unleased unit for a new owner, new unit?
It's so target days without revenue. It's ready.
No, this is days from management start date to lease start date.
So it's probably not ready. We're still turning it.
No.
And I'd say 21 days.
There's going to be a turn in the middle.
Wolf agrees.
21 days. That's remember, because you got to not only lease it, but the lease has to start all in there too.
Yeah. I'm going to take on great properties and I'm going to shoot for 21 days. Sometimes it's going to be 30, but I'm going to shoot for 21.
Okay.
This is my ideal target, right?
Yeah. But that you're willing to hold your team accountable to, everybody. All right. So this is not like we're not in heaven. This is stuff that you would actually be willing to manage to with your team.
Karen. All right, so I'm going to
100%.
revise my answer because Peter reminded me about when the lease start date, and so usually it's going to be start of the month. So I'm going to
You
30.
push it 30.
I put 28.
Okay. I probably should have upped these to 45. All right. Kelly, what is your target days without revenue on leased units? So time from lease end date to lease start date. Same? 21?
Yeah, I go 21.
Okay. All
Okay,
right.
chat. Everyone watching, you're filling this out too as we go. So pull this up, click
With
through
your
as we're clicking
numbers.
through.
Yeah.
Yeah, with your numbers.
We need
And don't put
100.
high numbers in hopes that like you skew the data and then like, look, I'm a top performer.
We need 100 people filling out this survey right now. So click in the link in chat and follow through with us. All
The
right,
baby
Trey's
agrees.
done. Trey, you're an overachiever. Thank you. All right, Kelly, what is your target speed of application qualification?
3 days.
Days from all documents collected to applicant qualified.
3 days.
3 days. All right. What is your target resident churn rate? Percent of residents active at the beginning of the year who will leave during the year.
So basically 1 minus your lease renewal rate, kind of, if you think of it that way. If you include month to month in your
Roughly.
renewal rate. Yeah.
But we're talking about, this sounds like it's people leaving early, not at.
But potentially leaving after their, at the end of their lease agreement, leaving, potentially midway through or after a certain number of month to month rental months.
It includes normal departures as well, like the end of their lease.
Everything.
I'm gonna say 40%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
40?
Of people who are leaving at the end of their leases with the number of one bedrooms.
40% leaving in a year. So what percent of tenants are going to leave what percent of units are going to go vacant in a year?
Yeah, we're seeing, I'd say 30%.
I said 15.
Okay.
Multifamily is like close to 50. Single family, we do better.
It is, but I'd say right now national average is about 33, so I'm going to go 30.
What is your target speed to repair, Kelly, on non-turn work orders?
In single family?
Yeah.
Target speed to repair, I'm going to say 5 days.
Okay.
I want it faster than that, but I'm going to say 5 days.
What is your target triage rate? What percent of work orders will be resolved without sending a vendor or technician?
I'm going to say 20%.
20%. Okay. And then last one, we didn't talk about this. Oh yeah. What is your target first response time in business hours? Does not include off hours.
During business hours, I'm going to say 4 hours.
All right.
You gotta drink more Red Bull, Kelly.
So I typically have people shoot for 2 hours, but I think if we're looking at across the board, how quickly people are responding during business hours, I think it's probably a lot more than 4 hours in reality.
Okay. All right.
I said 1.
What is your target delinquency rate, Kelly? And this is percent of units. We're not talking about percent of rent balance. Percent of units with an unpaid rent balance at the end of the month, not the middle of the month, not the end of the grace period, at the end of the month.
I want no delinquency at the end of the month.
You may want it, but you ain't gonna get it.
I achieved it many, many months. So I'm going to say 5%.
Okay. All right.
How much are you guys seeing, Wolf and Peter, right now?
Goose egg. You don't pay, you got to go.
Well, no, but like, obviously you start the process, but they're still there at the end of the month.
Okay,
yeah,
guys.
I mean, so we've only had like 1 eviction in the last 12 months. So like our goal is zero rollover.
All right.
I was zeroing everyone out at the end of the month.
Enough debate. All right, so guys, get your surveys in. We're going to look at the results of this, the summarized results of this in about 2 minutes. Get your surveys in, and then we'll probably go just a few minutes long because we got some really fun first time in industry data about ready to pop off here. In the meantime, we talked about how PMs need to get up the ladder of the hierarchy of insight from bank balance to financial metrics to operational metrics to real-time metrics. And this is what Profit Coach is all about helping PMs do with our SIGI metrics and our process refinement approach. And so what I want to give you guys the opportunity to do is meet with one of our team to schedule a data-driven process design diagnostic. In other words, if you're using data to inform how you build your processes, what are the quality of your processes? What is working, not working right now? What needs to be true of your processes in order to accomplish your goals while maximizing efficiency? And what would it mean to have SIGI metrics that you can use with your team so at the end of every day, they know what needs to be true in order to win every day, and to know when they can go home. These are the kinds of things that can help move performance forward. We'd love to get on the phone with you, because I know you guys just filled out a survey a couple of weeks ago saying a lot of you said that you are not happy with how your processes are working. So take us up on this. We'd be happy to dive in and have this conversation with you and get some clarity on where your opportunities are and how you can move forward with using data to optimize your processes. All right. With that being said, we are going to do a big reveal here. And if you want to take advantage of this diagnostic, make sure you're in Zoom right now to see the poll that I just put up. And you can just respond yes to that poll, and we'll get that scheduled with you. In the meantime, let's go ahead and pull up the data. Okay, get a little bit of a drum roll. Here we go.
Let's go.
So we're going to hit refresh, and we're going to see the results. All right, first question. What is your target turnover speed?
You gotta upgrade your plan though.
Oh.
Maximum response limit reached. Oh no.
Hey guys, this is gonna make you come back, because what I'm showing you is data for the first
The teaser.
25 responses, but I have 65. All right, so if you want to see the data with the full 65 responses, then you better come back for another Profit Coach webinar. All right, but we got 25 responses right now. So target turnover speed is a median of 14, which is the middle number in the response range, average of 12, and minimum was 3, maximum was 28.
3 days, wow.
This is Kelli was at 5. No, 7. So this is really significant. All right, like you can see the range. Like if you're the guy at 28, you're like looking at 3, and you're probably thinking, well, that's just that guy in that market. But what if there was a guy doing 3 in your market? Would you want to know how? That's the kind of questions we're going to be able to answer with this data. All right, median is 14 days. That's about where I would have thought, maybe on the longish side, 12 to 14, maybe 10 to 14. I'm a little surprised that it's as high as it is. Okay, and then moving on, what is your target days without revenue? Again, minimum is 15, maximum is 30. Probably should have bumped the ceiling up on that one a little bit, but the median here is 21, okay? A median is 21, average is 24.
Cool.
What is your target days without revenue on leased units? Minimum of 3, maximum of 30, median and average are very close here, which means that generally speaking, everybody was a little bit lower at 21 days. Kelli, you nailed it. Okay. Very good. What is your target speed application qualification? And let me give you this is what you're looking for. Minimum is 1, maximum is 5. That's interesting. Okay, I'm a little surprised. Median is 3, mean or average is 2.83. Nailed it again, Kelli. You're calling it. All right. What is your target resident churn rate? Maximum is 40%, minimum is 2%. That's a good day. The median is 10, and the mean is 14. I kind of don't think we actually understand this metric, because generally speaking, I think we're experiencing much closer to 30% churn with tenants. So it's a good target, but I don't think we're anywhere close to this as an industry. But it's interesting. That gap is interesting to me. Like, people gut resonate with the idea that they should only be at about 15% churn on their tenants, when in reality, we're probably closer to 30 and 40%.
I think it also depends on your portfolio a lot. If you're running a lot of single bedroom or 2 bedroom, that's more transitional housing. You're going to have people move more frequently. Your 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, 5 bedroom houses are going to have a little bit more longevity to them.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. What is your target speed to repair? This is on non-turn work orders. This is days from work orders submitted to work orders completed. And minimum, again, 2, maximum 14, median at 6, and average at 6.75. And then lastly, second to last, what is your target triage rate? And this is, again, the percent of work orders resolved without sending a vendor or technician. 5%, maximum of 30%, median at 10%, average at 13.63%. Yeah, do you have an idea what definition wasn't clear?
We're just talking about the churn, tenant churn.
Yeah. Okay.
Property Meld has great data on this particular one, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Lastly, what is your target first response time in business hours? Minimum of 1, maximum of 16, and which, again, that would be 2 days. So that would basically be a 48-hour response time in terms of total hours. And the target, or the median, is 4. The average is 5. And lastly, I've said that like 3 times now. What is your target delinquency rate? And this is the percent of units with an unpaid rent balance at the end of the month. 1 to 10, median at 3, average at 3.39. You missed this one a little bit, Kelly. Not enough Red Bull.
I want to see 0. That's what I want to see, but I get so much pushback on 0.
All right.
I don't understand that. You want to see it. Like, yeah, obviously we want to see it, but what could you do as a property manager to realistically get there? I mean, some percentage of residents just don't pay the rent.
It's a lot of proactive communication. It's a lot of making sure that when you're vetting tenants, you're putting the right people in the property, holding high standards.
Yeah, and I would argue that could get you to 1 to 2%, but 0?
Yeah, again, this is the target to which you would be willing to bonus your team. Okay, so like,
bonus your team, then that's a different number.
Well, no, it's like it's kind of like, okay, hold your team accountable to it. All right.
Yeah.
Jan says they're at 0, so there you go, Peter. It is possible. All right, everybody. Thank you so much again. Just click yes on that poll if you want to talk more process and how to plug data into your processes with Profit Coach. And in the meantime, we just looked at the results. In the next several weeks, we're going to be sending out an expanded version of the survey that we just looked at to get the initial set of targets for the official PM operations standards to be released at NARPM National. So stay tuned for that survey. Help us out. If you have any questions or comments on the definitions, you disagree, still interested in that feedback. And we really appreciate you being part of this journey to help us take the industry to the next level. Kelly, Wolf, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today and
Thanks for having me.
Of the process with the council. Up next, folks, our next Profit Power Hour on October 2nd, 12 p.m., episode 7. Until then, thank you and have a great rest of the day. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye all.